A woman knocked door to door selling candies to support her niece, never imagining that destiny would lead her to a millionaire's mansion. When the girl extended her hand offering a sweet, he recognized that face. And a secret buried for years came to light. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like on this video, and comment where you're watching from. Sometimes the eyes that see everything are those that nobody notices. In the Richardson mansion, silence had weight. It was a silence made of polished marble, fine wood, and imported crystals. A silence that cost millions to build and weighed on the shoulders of those who didn't belong to that world. Among imposing corridors and rooms decorated with priceless artwork, there were people who moved like shadows. Staff trained to exist without being noticed, to serve without interrupting the perfect flow of that privileged life. Emma knew that silence well. For 12 years, her hands brought life to the Richardson family kitchen, creating flavors that fueled business conversations and social dinners. To the employers, she was just a pair of skilled hands, nameless, historyless, voiceless. The pure, gray uniform she wore seemed designed to camouflage her existence among stainless steel appliances and imported marble countertops. But to Michael, her 9-year-old son, Emma was the entire universe. It was in her calloused hands that he saw beauty, in her deep, dark circles that he glimpsed sacrifice, and in her tired smile that he found immeasurable love. When Emma's eyes, always attentive to recipe details, turned to her son, they gained a brightness that no crystal in the mansion could imitate. That winter morning, when the babysitter canceled at the last minute, Emma had no choice. Michael would need to accompany her to work. "Stay quiet, my dear. Don't touch anything. Be invisible," she whispered as they entered through the back of the property. The boy nodded, eyes wide at the magnitude of the place. To him, it was like entering an enchanted castle where each object seemed to tell stories of an inaccessible world. What neither of them knew was that on that cold morning, the mansion's silence held more than secrets of wealth. It held conspiracies, and that Michael's small hands, which his mother had asked to remain still, were about to dismantle a plot that threatened to destroy the empire the Richardsons had taken generations to build. Destiny sometimes chooses the most unlikely messengers, and that day it had chosen a curious boy and an invisible cook. The aroma of fresh bread and newly brewed coffee filled the kitchen when Michael spotted the phone. It was a sophisticated device, different from the old cell phone his mother used. Fixed to the wall, with buttons that glowed softly, it seemed to call to his curious fingers. Emma was focused on preparing the elaborate breakfast that Mr. Richardson demanded every morning: poached eggs with smoked salmon, artisanal toast with French butter, and fresh fruits arranged in perfect geometric patterns. "Mum, can I draw a little?" Michael asked, sitting at the small support table in the corner of the kitchen. "You can, son, but without making noise. Mr. Richardson hates being disturbed before breakfast," Emma replied without taking her eyes off the delicate operation of balancing the egg yolk perfectly over the salmon slice. The morning silence was suddenly broken by the phone's shrill ring. Emma shuddered, almost compromising her culinary work. She looked at the device with apprehension. It wasn't her role to answer calls, but all other staff were busy with their morning tasks, and Mr. Richardson hadn't come down yet. Before she could decide what to do, Michael, driven by irrepressible childish curiosity, ran to the device and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" His childish voice sounded hesitant. The response came like a flood. A masculine voice, deep and hurried, spoke rapidly from the other end of the line. "Edward, it's Marcus. Listen, we need to act now. The transfer to the Cayman Islands is ready. The false documents have already been inserted into the company system. Claudia, confirmed that the board will vote in favor of removal on Friday. We need you to leave the country tonight, before the audit discovers the parallel accounts. The journalists have already been paid to release the scandal tomorrow morning. Richard will take over as temporary administrator until we liquidate the main assets. The stock drop will be brutal, exactly as we planned. And the best part, Richardson has no idea what's coming." Michael froze, the phone glued to his ear, his eyes wide searching for his mother. He didn't understand everything, but something in the urgency of that voice, in strange words like parallel accounts and false documents, made his stomach churn. Something was wrong, very wrong. "Mom," he called with a trembling voice. Emma, noticing the panic expression on her son's face, dropped the spatula and ran to him. She took the phone, covering the mouthpiece with her hand. "Who is it, Michael?" "A man, saying strange things. About Mr. Richardson. I think they want to do something bad to him." Emma brought the phone to her ear in time to hear, "And after he loses everything, Vivian guarantees the divorce will drain what's left. She has access to all passwords and safes. 12 years married and he trusts her like an idiot." "Edward, are you there? Edward?" Emma's blood ran cold. Vivian was Mr. Richardson's wife, an elegant and apparently devoted woman. Edward must be the personal secretary, a trusted man who had worked for the family for years. And that voice, from the description, it could only be Marcus Daniels, Mr. Richardson's longtime partner. "Hello? Edward?" the voice insisted. Emma hung up with trembling hands. Her first instinct was to protect Michael, hugging him tightly against her body. "What do we do, Mom?" asked the boy, feeling his mother's racing heart against his face. Emma looked at the clock. In 15 minutes, Mr. Richardson would come down for breakfast. 15 minutes to decide whether to interfere in something that didn't concern her, risking her job, or pretend nothing happened, forever carrying the weight of knowing she could have prevented someone's ruin. "Let's finish his breakfast," she said finally. "And then we'll tell the truth." Michael nodded, his eyes reflecting maturity beyond his 9 years. They both knew they were about to cross an invisible line that separated their worlds from the Richardsons' world, a line that, once crossed, would change their lives forever. What Emma couldn't predict was that this decision would transform not just the Richardsons' fate, but her own, rewriting a story where invisibility would become power and silence would become truth. Breakfast was served punctually at 8 o'clock. Anthony Richardson, at 58, maintained an impeccable routine. He sat at the head of the long dining table, alone as every morning. Vivian, his wife 22 years younger, rarely woke before 10. He unfolded the linen napkin over his lap with mechanical movements, while Emma arranged the plates before him with the precision of a dancer who knows every step by heart. "Good morning, sir," Emma said, her voice almost a whisper. Richardson made a light gesture with his head, minimal recognition of her existence. His eyes already scanned the headlines on the tablet beside his plate. To him, Emma was like the kitchen appliances, essential, functional, but dispensable of personal attention. Today, however, something was different. He noticed when he raised his eyes for a brief moment. Emma seemed tense, her hands trembled slightly while serving the coffee. "Any problem with the kitchen?" he asked, not out of concern for her, but for his breakfast. Emma took a deep breath. Years of conditioning had taught her to be invisible, not to disturb. But now, the weight of what she knew forced her to break this invisible barrier. "Mr. Richardson, there's something I need to tell you." He raised his eyes from the tablet, surprised by the protocol breach. Staff didn't initiate conversations. "My son," he answered a call earlier. By mistake. "Your son?" Richardson frowned, noticing for the first time the boy standing timidly near the kitchen door. "I didn't know you brought children to work." "It was an emergency, sir. The babysitter canceled," and Emma swallowed hard, realizing she was deviating from the main subject. "The call, it was for Edward, from Marcus Daniels." The partner's name captured Richardson's attention. He put down his fork carefully. "And they're planning something against you, sir. Transfers to Cayman Islands, false documents, a board meeting to remove you." And Emma hesitated, her courage wavering. How to tell a man that his wife was involved in his destruction? And what? Richardson's voice was now sharp as a blade. "Your wife, Mrs. Vivian, seems to be involved too." The silence that followed was dense as concrete. Richardson remained motionless, his face an impenetrable mask. For a terrible moment, Emma thought he would fire her on the spot for such insolence. "This is a very serious accusation," he said finally, his voice controlled. "What exactly did you hear?" Michael stepped forward, as if he felt he needed to defend his mother. "The man talked about transfers, false documents, that Mrs. Vivian has all your passwords, and that after you lose everything, she'll drain the rest with the divorce," the boy said, reproducing the exact words he had captured. Richardson studied the boy with renewed interest, then looked at Emma. "Why are you telling me this? You could simply ignore what you heard." Emma held his gaze, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Because it wouldn't be right, sir. What they're planning, it's not fair." Richardson let out a dry laugh, without humor. "Justice, a rare concern these days." He stood up, the meal forgotten. "How much do you want?" Emma blinked, confused. "Sir, to keep this information." What's your price? Indignation colored Emma's face. I don't want money, sir. I just thought you should know. Richardson studied her for a long time, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex enigma. In his world, every action had a price. Every loyalty could be bought. The idea of someone acting purely on principles was almost incomprehensible. See, he said finally, though his tone suggested otherwise. Return to your duties. Don't comment on this with anyone else. I'll verify some things. When Emma and Michael withdrew, Anthony Richardson remained motionless, looking at the coffee. Growing cold. In his mind, gears spun furiously. If what the cook said was true, he was surrounded by traitors, including the woman sleeping in his bed. Could it be possible? Had he been so blind? He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the impeccable garden reflected the order he had always prized in his life, an order that now seemed to be crumbling under his feet. He picked up his personal phone, not the company's, not the house's, and dialed a number he rarely used. Charles? It's me. I need a discreet investigation. Yes, it's urgent. And Charles? Don't trust anyone on my team. Nobody. As he hung up, his eyes caught Emma's reflection in the kitchen, quietly organizing the breakfast dishes. A woman he had barely noticed in 12 years of service, and beside her, a curious boy who, unknowingly, might have just saved his empire. The irony didn't escape him. In a world of suited sharks and designer-dressed snakes, it was the invisible, ones who proved worthy of trust. The 3 following days at the Richardson mansion were like a silent and tense dance. Superficially, everything followed its normal course. Meals served, meetings held, social smiles exchanged. But beneath this, fabricated normalcy ran an underground current of frantic investigation and growing paranoia. Emma noticed the subtle changes. Anthony Richardson, previously distant and absorbed in his financial empire, now observed everything and everyone with hawk eyes. His phone conversations became briefer and more cryptic. Important documents no longer left his Italian leather briefcase, and, most notably, his behavior with Vivian alternated between calculated coldness and false displays of affection that didn't reach his eyes. Vivian, in turn, seemed to float through the mansion in a cloud of expensive perfume and rehearsed smiles. To someone who didn't know about the conspiracy, she would be just the trophy wife playing her social role. But to Emma, who now watched with alert eyes, the whispered phone calls in the garden and frequent meetings with Edward gained dark meaning. Michael, instructed to remain in the service area and away from the employer's eyes, spent his days drawing at the small table in the pantry. But his drawings, previously colorful and full of superheroes, now portrayed shadowy figures and secret conversations, phones and suitcases full of money. The tension in the environment had infiltrated even his childish imagination. On the evening of the 3rd day, when Emma was tidying the kitchen after dinner, Anthony Richardson appeared unexpectedly. She almost dropped a crystal serving dish with the shock. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," he said, in a tone Emma had never heard, almost human. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked, drying her hands on her apron. Richardson closed the kitchen door and checked they were alone. His face, always controlled, showed signs of fatigue and tension. "You were right," he said finally, his voice low. "About everything." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't a feeling of triumph, but of fear for what would come next. "My investigator confirmed every detail. Falsified documents inserted into the company records, secret accounts opened in tax havens, shares being sold discreetly, and an extraordinary board meeting scheduled for tomorrow." He ran his hand over his face, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "And Vivian, she's been meeting with Marcus for months. Not just business conspiracy, but..." He didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. The betrayal was complete, professional and personal. "I'm sorry, sir," Emma said, not knowing what else to say. "Don't be sorry. Thanks to you and your son, I discovered in time. I'm taking measures. Tomorrow, they'll be the ones receiving a surprise at the board meeting." His eyes, usually cold, now had an almost feverish glow. "But I need one last favor from you, sir. Edward doesn't know I've discovered everything. He still thinks I'm in ignorance. Tomorrow, he'll come get some documents from my office before the meeting. Documents that I'll purposely leave for him to take." "False documents," Emma ventured, surprising herself with her own boldness. A thin smile curved Richardson's lips. "Precisely. But I need to know exactly who he communicates with after taking them." I need you and your son to be attentive to any call he makes from the mansion." Emma swallowed hard. One thing was reporting something they heard by accident. Another, very different, was deliberately spying. "Sir, I don't know if—" $50,000, Richardson interrupted. "Deposited in an account for your son, for his education. The kind of education you could never give him with your salary." Emma's heart raced. $50,000 was what she earned in almost 2 years of work. It represented the possibility of taking Michael out of the problematic public school, giving him a different future. Seeing her hesitation, Richardson continued, "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, Emma. Just be attentive and inform me. These people are trying to destroy me. They're using my house, under your nose, to architect my downfall." Emma thought about Michael, about his recent drawings full of shadowy figures. Somehow her innocent son had already been dragged into this story. The damage was already done. "You don't need to pay me, sir," she said finally. "I'll do this because it's the right thing to do." Richardson stared at her with genuine surprise, as if she had just spoken in an unknown language. "You're a surprising woman, Emma. We've worked under the same roof for 12 years, and I never really saw you." He walked to the door, then stopped. "The money will be deposited anyway. It's not a bribe. It's gratitude." When he left, Emma sat heavily in a chair, trembling. She had just officially allied herself with one of the most powerful and now most dangerous men in the city, against people who had the power to destroy her with a snap of their fingers. What had she done? That night, while putting Michael to bed, in the small staff room temporarily assigned to them, she hugged him with extra strength. "Mom, will everything be okay?" he asked, noticing her anguish. Emma stroked his hair, looking at those eyes that trusted her completely. "Yes, my love, but tomorrow we need to be very brave." Michael nodded solemnly. "Like heroes in stories?" A sad smile passed over Emma's lips. "Yes, like heroes. Even when nobody realizes we're heroes." In the mansion's master bedroom, a very different scene unfolded. Vivian glided perfume on her wrists while watching Anthony work on his laptop. "Won't you come to bed, darling?" she asked in a honeyed voice. "You've been working too much." Anthony raised his eyes, studying the face of the woman who had sworn to love him. The face he now knew was a perfect mask, hiding boundless ambition. "Soon," he replied, forcing a smile. "I just need to finish some details for tomorrow's meeting." The meeting? Vivian hesitated for an almost imperceptible instant. "Any problems?" "No." Anthony returned his eyes to the screen, hiding the cold he felt in his soul. "Just the company's future at stake, as always." That night, 4 people in the Richardson mansion stayed awake much later than bedtime, each for different reasons. Anthony planning his counteroffensive, Vivian sending coded messages to Marcus, Emma fearing for her son's future, and Michael drawing in his notebook an epic battle between invisible heroes and tie-wearing villains. The following morning would bring the confrontation that would forever change the destiny of all of them. The morning emerged gray and heavy, as if the sky itself sensed the storm forming inside the Richardson mansion. Emma woke before the alarm, after a night of restless sleep. Beside her, Michael slept deeply, his small body curled like a snail under the thin blanket. For a moment, she considered waking him and fleeing, taking the first bus away from that dangerous plot they had become involved in. But where would they go? With what money? And what example would she be setting for her son? Abandoning what was right out of fear, she got up silently and began preparing the most important breakfast of her career. Every movement in the kitchen was calculated, every noise minimized. Her senses were sharp, attentive to any sound out of the ordinary. At 7:30, Edward arrived, an hour earlier than usual. Emma watched him through the crack in the kitchen door as he walked hurriedly down the corridor toward Anthony's office. The secretary, always impeccably dressed and composed, today showed visible sweat stains under the arms of his light blue shirt. "Michael," Emma whispered, gently waking her son, "I need you to do something very important for me." The boy's eyes opened, instantly alert. Emma explained his mission in a low voice, and he nodded with the seriousness of a small soldier. Meanwhile, in the office, Edward discreetly searched Anthony's desk. His eyes gleamed when he found what he was looking for, a red folder with the company letterhead, apparently forgotten under some papers. He quickly checked its contents, exactly the documents they needed to complete the trap against Richardson. The secretary put the folder in his briefcase and left the office, silently closing the door behind him. In the corridor, instead of leaving immediately, He went to the fixed phone installed in a discreet alcove near the main staircase. He needed to inform Marcus about the success of his mission before the meeting. What Edward didn't notice was Michael, strategically hidden behind a large ornamental plant, observing his every movement with attentive eyes. "Marcus, I got the documents," Edward whispered into the phone, nervously looking around. "Yes, exactly as you said. He left them on the desk. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Is Vivian ready? Great. I'll be at the office in 20 minutes with everything. Yes, after the board vote, we transfer the last batch. No, nobody knows about the money in the Cayman Islands. Yes, she guaranteed the system passwords still work." Michael memorized every word, his heart beating so loud he feared being discovered. When Edward finally hung up and left hurriedly, the boy ran to the kitchen, where Emma and Anthony Richardson waited anxiously. "He called Marcus," Michael reported, proud of his mission. "He talked about the documents, about transferring money after a vote, about Cayman Islands, and that Mrs. Vivian guaranteed the passwords still work." Anthony nodded gravely, his face a mask of cold determination. "Excellent work, boy." He turned to Emma. "He'd make a great spy." Michael smiled at the unexpected compliment, but Emma felt a tightness in her chest. This wasn't the future she imagined for her son. "What happens now, sir?" she asked. Anthony checked his watch. "Now the game turns." He picked up his phone and typed a short message. "My lawyers and the federal police are waiting for just my signal." The documents Edward took contain proof of his own involvement in the scheme and are electronically marked. The moment he inserts them into the company system, tracking will be activated. Emma swallowed hard. "And Mrs. Vivian?" A shadow passed over Anthony's face. For a brief moment, the powerful and calculating man gave way to a betrayed husband, hurt beyond words. "She's being monitored since yesterday. Right now, she's heading to the airport with 2 suitcases full of jewelry, documents, and cash. Marcus will meet her there thinking they're about to escape together." His voice hardened. "They won't reach the boarding gate." Anthony's phone vibrated with a message. He read it, and a humorless smile curved his lips. "Edward just inserted the documents into the system. The trap has been triggered." He looked at Emma and Michael. "You two just helped save a 50-year company and 3,000 jobs." Emma felt a wave of relief mixed with apprehension. She had done the right thing, but at what cost? Now they were irrevocably involved in Anthony Richardson's life, for better or worse. "Sir, what happens to us now?" she asked, her hand protectively gripping Michael's shoulder. Anthony studied them for a long moment, as if really seeing them for the first time. "That depends. What would you like to happen, Emma?" The question caught her by surprise. In 12 years working for the Richardsons, nobody had ever asked what she wanted. I'd like Michael to have a good education, a better future than mine." Anthony nodded slowly. "That can be arranged. But you? What do you want for yourself?" Emma blinked, disconcerted. What did she want for herself? She had spent so much time thinking only about survival, about her son's well-being, that she barely remembered having her own desires. "Respect," she said finally. "To be seen as a person, not as a service." Something gleamed in Anthony's eyes, understanding perhaps, or recognition of a long-ignored truth. "Fair," he said simply. "Very fair." His phone vibrated again. "This time with a call," he answered, listened briefly and hung up. "It's done. Vivian and Marcus were detained at the airport. Edward is being escorted out of the company building right now." He faced Emma. "I need to go to the board meeting now. When I return, we'll talk about your future and Michael's. A different future, I promise." When Anthony left, leaving them in the kitchen that had been Emma's only domain for so long, mother and son hugged tightly. They didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but they knew that somehow they had crossed an invisible frontier. From shadows, in the mansion's corners, they had become central pieces in a story that would resonate for a long time. "We did the right thing, didn't we, Mom?" Michael asked, his small voice against her chest. Emma kissed the top of his head, looking through the kitchen window at the world outside that suddenly seemed broader, more accessible. "Yes, my love, we did the right thing." And for the first time in years, she really believed it. Outside, heavy clouds began to dissipate, allowing some rays of sun to filter through. A weather change, an omen of different days that were to come. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of events. The scandal involving the attempted coup against the Richardson empire splashed across newspaper front pages for consecutive days. Images of Vivian, the sophisticated trophy wife, being escorted by police at the airport, with her high heels and expensive jewelry contrasting cruelly with the handcuffs, became a symbol of spectacular downfall. Beside her, Marcus Daniels, the decades-old partner, tried to hide his face from cameras, his habitual arrogance replaced by palpable shame. Edward, the secretary, was the first to break. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided meticulous details of the plan, falsifying documents, diverting funds, manipulating the board, causing artificial stock drops, and finally, buying the company for a fraction of its real value. Everything, orchestrated over 18 months of secret meetings, coded emails, and offshore accounts. For the public, it was just another drama among the super-rich, a soap opera of corporate and marital betrayal that provided fleeting entertainment. Few knew the crucial role that a cook and her son had played in preventing the collapse of a company that employed thousands. At the Richardson mansion, meanwhile, the changes were silent but profound. On a rainy September afternoon, Anthony Richardson summoned Emma for a meeting in his office. Not in the kitchen, not in the staff quarters, but in his personal sanctuary, where previously only executives and lawyers were allowed. Emma entered hesitantly, still wearing the gray uniform, but with her hair loose from the clips that normally held it in a severe bun. Michael was at school, a new private school, where he had started the previous week, to the amazement of staff who didn't understand the boss's sudden generosity. "Please sit down," Anthony said, indicating not the simple chair in front of his desk, but the comfortable armchair beside the fireplace, a seat for equals, not subordinates. Emma obeyed, her hands restlessly smoothing the rough fabric of the uniform over her knees. "I imagine you've been following the news," he began. "Yes, sir, it's hard to avoid." "Anthony," he corrected gently. "I think we've moved beyond formality, haven't we?" Emma nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy. "Anthony," she repeated, the word strange in her mouth. "All three will face justice. Edward has already confessed everything, begging for clemency. Marcus remains arrogant, but the evidence is irrefutable." He paused. As for Vivian, she claimed she was manipulated, that she knew nothing. Emma noticed the pain behind his words. 12 years of marriage, destroyed not just by betrayal, but by the revelation that perhaps there had never been true love, only interest. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "Don't be sorry. You gave me a rare gift, Emma. The truth, before it was too late." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know what I discovered about you in these past weeks? That you're 37 years old. That you were abandoned by Michael's father when you were 7 months pregnant. That you finished high school with excellent grades but could never attend college. That you support your sick mother in a distant neighborhood." Emma felt her face burn. It was strange to be studied, to be the object of interest after years of invisibility. "Why do you care about this now?" she asked, gathering courage. "Because I saved my company thanks to you, but lost something more important in the process. My illusion. Vivian betrayed me because I never really knew her, never cared to know who she was beyond the surface." His eyes, normally hard, were reflective. "I realized I did the same with every person around me, including you, who had been in my house for 12 years. There was silence while both absorbed the weight of that truth. "What do you want from me, Anthony?" Emma finally asked, tired of roundabout talk. "I want to offer you a position in the company." Emma blinked, confused. "In the company? Doing what? I don't know anything about business, but you know about people, about integrity." He leaned forward. "Emma, you saw what 3 people close to me managed to plan without me suspecting. Vivian, Marcus, Edward. I trusted them blindly. Meanwhile, I completely ignored those who truly demonstrated loyalty. Are you offering me a job out of gratitude or guilt?" Anthony smiled, appreciating her frankness. "Out of necessity. I need someone who can see what I don't see, hear what I don't hear. Someone who understands the people who are usually invisible, but who sustain the entire building. A spy, a corporate ethics consultant. Someone who can evaluate not just what we do, but how it affects people, employees, clients, communities." He sighed. "This scandal made me realize I built an empire, but lost sight of why. Money became the end, not the means." Emma looked out the window, at the property's extensive gardens. Her world had been so small. The kitchen, the staff room, the bus to the distant suburb where her mother lived. Anthony's proposal opened an entirely new horizon, frightening in its vastness. "What if I'm not capable? I have no training, experience." "You will have. I'll provide tutors, courses, Whatever is necessary. He faced her. Emma, you and Michael saved not just my company, but probably my life. They wouldn't have stopped at financial ruin. A chill ran down Emma's spine as she understood the implication. This isn't just about giving you an opportunity, Anthony continued. It's about giving me an opportunity to do things differently. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. Accepting would mean leaving behind the world she knew, however limited it was. It would mean exposing herself, becoming visible with all the vulnerabilities that entailed. Michael, she began, will have the best education, a bright future. Anthony smiled. That boy has a natural talent for observing people. He noticed things about Edward and Vivian that my security analysts, with years of training, didn't perceive. Emma couldn't contain a smile of pride. He's always been observant. They say children see what adults ignore. Exactly what I need now. Someone who sees what I've been ignoring. Anthony extended his hand. So what do you say? Ready to leave the kitchen and help rebuild a company from values, not just numbers? Emma looked at the extended hand. The hand of a man who, until a few weeks ago, barely noticed her existence. A man who now offered not just a job, but a chance for transformation. For her, for Michael, and perhaps for many others who, like her, had spent life in the shadows. Yes, she said finally, shaking his hand. I'm ready. What Emma couldn't imagine was that this handshake sealed not just her personal destiny, but the beginning of a larger transformation. That her journey from kitchen to boardroom would become a symbol of change in a corporate culture that for decades had valued only numbers, not people. And that little Michael, the boy who answered a call by chance, would grow up observing this transformation, absorbing its deepest lessons about power, invisibility, and the courage to speak the truth, even when nobody expects to hear it from you. 6 months, Anthony said, looking through the panoramic window of his office on the 30th floor. 6 months since everything changed. Emma, sitting in the leather armchair that once belonged to Marcus Daniels, nodded. She wore a simple but elegant, navy blue suit, far from the excessive glamour that characterized the company's female executives, more distant still from the gray kitchen uniform that had been her second skin for so many years. How are they doing? She asked, although she already knew the answer. All three? Vivian accepted the plea deal. She'll testify against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. Edward is already in semi-open regime, cooperating with investigations into other similar schemes in the market. Emma observed Anthony's profile against the afternoon light. At 58, he seemed simultaneously older and younger. The worry lines had deepened, but there was also a new vitality in his movements, as if a weight had been removed from his shoulders. And the company? She asked, although the reports on her desk already told the story. Surviving, better than many expected. He turned to face her. The new ethics code you helped implement is causing more stir than the scandal itself. Some shareholders think we're getting sentimental. Emma smiled. Sentimental? Because we demand transparency in international operations? Because we raise the minimum wage within the company? Or because we now have a daycare in the building? All of that. And mainly because we hired an ex-cook as director of social responsibility. Anthony returned the smile. But the results are there. Productivity increased 12%. Employee turnover fell 20%. And press coverage has never been so positive. Emma stood up, instinctively adjusting her blouse. She still wasn't completely comfortable in her new clothes, in her new skin. Michael asked if he can visit the company next week. The school is doing a project on future careers, and he wants to interview some employees. Anthony raised his eyebrows. 9 years old and already thinking about careers? 10 now, Emma corrected. And he keeps saying he wants to be a people specialist, whatever that means. Smart kid. People are the most valuable and least understood asset in any business. Anthony checked his watch. Speaking of which, we're late for the meeting with the employee committee. As they walked down the corridor toward the meeting room, Emma noticed the curious look she still attracted. For many in the company, her meteoric rise was the subject of endless gossip. The cook who saved the empire, the employee who became an executive. Some admired, others envied, many simply didn't understand. But inside the meeting room awaited the real challenge. Richard Mendez, one of the oldest directors, stood up as soon as they entered. His face was a mask of professional courtesy, but Emma had learned to read beyond appearances. Anthony, Emma, he greeted, the hesitation almost imperceptible before pronouncing her name without any title. We were just discussing, The new transparency guidelines. Excellent, Anthony replied, sitting at the head of the table. And Richard exchanged glances with two other directors before continuing. We have concerns. Full implementation would require a review of contracts across 3 continents. It would be expensive and potentially risky to expose operational details. Emma felt the tension growing in the room. 6 months ago, she would have lowered her head and remained silent. Today, she took a deep breath and spoke. Expensive like an internal conspiracy that almost destroyed the company? Risky like blindly trusting people who planned your ruin, Mr. Mendez? A tense silence fell over the room. Richard stiffened, clearly uncomfortable with the direct confrontation. Ms. Santos, with all respect, extreme situations shouldn't dictate permanent policies. The incident with Marcus and the others was regrettable, but isolated. Was it really? Emma opened a folder she carried. Perhaps you'd like to explain. Why 3 of our suppliers in Asia have registered addresses that don't exist, or why the contract with Minertech was renewed 3 times without bidding, despite their prices being 15% above market. Richard visibly paled. How? Where did you get this information? I talked to the right people. People nobody usually notices. People who serve coffee in important meetings, who clean rooms after confidential negotiations, who transport documents without being questioned. Emma kept her gaze steady. Invisible people see a lot, Mr. Mendez. I used to be one of them. Anthony watched the exchange with interest, noticing how the other directors avoided looking directly at Richard. Something was happening, something even he hadn't noticed. Richard, he finally intervened. Is there something specific about the new guidelines that concerns you? The director adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. Just practical concerns. Anthony, nothing we can't resolve with time and proper adjustments. The meeting continued, but a new dynamic had been established. While the directors discussed clauses and implementations, Emma watched Richard with renewed attention. His reaction had been too strong for simple professional disagreement. There was something more, something she needed to investigate. At the end of the meeting, when everyone was leaving, Emma approached Anthony. We need to talk about Richard, she whispered. In private, Anthony nodded slightly, keeping his face neutral. 6 months ago, he would have dismissed any concern from a kitchen employee. Today, he had learned to listen first, judge later. Back in his office, away from curious ears, Emma exposed her suspicions. Richard is too nervous about transparency. And those contracts in Asia, something isn't right. Anthony massaged his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. Emma, Richard has been with me for 2 decades. He was my father's friend. Marcus was with you longer. And Vivian was your wife. The words came out harsher than intended, but time for delicacies had passed. Anthony, I learned something in all those years observing from the kitchen. Often, betrayal comes from those so close we consider them above suspicion. Anthony sighed deeply. What do you suggest then? A discreet audit of projects Richard supervised in the last 5 years. And she hesitated. And we need eyes and ears where Richard doesn't expect. Someone who can observe him without raising suspicions. A knowing smile slowly formed on Anthony's face. Someone invisible. Emma nodded. Exactly. As she left the office that afternoon, Emma reflected on the irony of her situation. She had left the kitchen, but still carried with her the most valuable skill she had learned there. Observing without being noticed, hearing without seeming to listen, seeing the truths hidden behind carefully maintained appearances. In the building lobby, she found Michael waiting with his teacher, a school visit to the financial district. His face lit up when he saw her. Mom, look! He pointed to the newly installed mural in the lobby. We're there! Emma approached and saw the new corporate display, pillars of the new Richardson Company. Among photos of featured employees, there was an image of her and Michael at the year-end party, both smiling at the camera. Below, a simple caption, Emma Santos and Michael Santos, reminding us that integrity and courage come from where we least expect. A receptionist passed by, respectfully greeting her. Good afternoon, Mrs. Santos. Emma returned the greeting, still not completely accustomed to being recognized, to being seen. She hugged Michael, feeling in him the same amazement, the same sensation of belonging to a world they had once only observed from afar. Mom, he whispered. The teacher asked if I can tell the story to the class, about the phone call and everything. Emma smiled, stroking his hair. Of course you can. It's an important story. Why? Emma looked again at the mural, at the diverse faces of employees who were now seen, valued, because it shows that sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear aprons or uniforms or simple badges, and that saving the day can start with something as small as answering a phone when nobody else is watching. As they left the building, Emma didn't notice Richard Mendez watching them from the lobby cafeteria, his calculating gaze following mother and son until they disappeared through the revolving door. In his hand, a phone pressed to his ear, and on his lips, urgent words being whispered. The battle for the soul of Richardson Corp was far from over. The documents spread across the table told a story of silent and meticulous betrayal. Emma studied them with growing apprehension, connecting dots that had previously gone unnoticed. Beside her, Anthony remained silent, his face hardened by the harsh reality being revealed. 5 years, Emma murmured. He's been diverting resources for at least 5 years. The discreet audit they had commissioned revealed a disturbing pattern. Richard Mendez, the trusted financial director, had built an intricate network of shell companies, overcharged contracts, and hidden commissions. A system so well architected that it had gone unnoticed even during the investigation that revealed Marcus and Vivian's plot. How didn't we notice? Anthony asked, more to himself than to Emma. How did he manage to hide this for so long? Emma sighed, reorganizing the papers. Because he was smart. He didn't get greedy like Marcus. He kept the diversions small enough not to attract attention, constant enough to accumulate a fortune over the years. She pointed to a chart. And, more importantly, he never associated with Marcus or Edward. He operated completely alone. Anthony stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the city gleamed under the afternoon sun, indifferent to the dramas unfolding in meeting rooms and executive offices. I thought the worst had passed, he said, his voice heavy with fatigue, that after Marcus and Vivian, we could rebuild on more solid foundations. Emma observed the man who in a few months had transformed her life. Anthony seemed older today, the weight of another betrayal slightly bending his always erect shoulders. Maybe this is the rebuilding, she suggested, standing to join him. Maybe we need to tear down all the rotten walls before we can build something truly solid. Anthony looked at her, a slight, sad smile on his lips. You always find hope in the darkest situations, don't you? I had to learn. As a single mother, working 3 jobs to support my son and sick mother, I couldn't afford despair. Emma crossed her arms, facing the city outside. And now, what do we do with Richard? Standard procedure would be to call the police, expose him publicly, prosecute. Anthony frowned. But another scandal so close to the first, shareholders, would panic. We could lose control of the company. Emma nodded, understanding the dilemma. And Richard knows that. That's why he's so confident. He bet you wouldn't risk another public scandal. A contemplative silence settled between them, while both pondered the implications. It was Emma who finally broke it. What if we don't make it public? Not yet. Anthony arched an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? Richard believes he's safe, because he knows the game rules. He expects us to follow the corporate manual. Emma smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But I don't come from the corporate world, Anthony. I come from a place where you learn to be creative to survive. In the days that followed, a carefully orchestrated plan began to unfold. Emma mobilized an invisible network within the company. Receptionists, security guards, janitors, administrative assistants. People Richard barely noticed, but who noticed everything about him. Carmen, the coffee server who served at board meetings, reported conversations captured while executives talked as if she didn't exist. George, Richard's occasional driver, made small detours en routes, coincidentally, passing by suspicious addresses linked to the shell companies. Solange, the receptionist on the 28th floor, kept a meticulous record of all unscheduled visits Richard received. Michael, fascinated by the operation, nicknamed it the Invisible Network. To him, it was like a spy movie coming to life. To Emma, it was the practical application of a lesson she had learned during years of silent service. The powerful are only truly powerful when nobody is paying attention. On a particularly crucial afternoon, Emma found herself in a small cafe, 2 blocks from the company. Sitting across from her was Charles, the private investigator Anthony had hired months earlier to unravel Marcus's conspiracy. He's taking the bait, Charles informed, discreetly sliding an envelope across the table. Did exactly as you suggested. I approached him as a contact from the external audit, hinting I had discovered irregularities. but would be willing to lose some evidence for a price. And he hesitated but scheduled a meeting. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. at the Marina Hotel. Charles smiled. "Do you want me to use recording equipment?" Emma shook her head. "No, just memorize everything. We can't risk anything that could be legally questioned later." Meanwhile, in the temporary apartment Emma and Michael now occupied, the boy worked on his school project about future careers. On the living room table, dozens of newspaper clippings, drawings, and notes formed a colorful mosaic. "Mom," he said when Emma arrived, "I've decided what I want to be when I grow up." Emma smiled, setting the document folder on the sofa. "And what would that be, my love?" "I want to be a truth guardian," he declared, with all the seriousness his 10 years allowed. "Someone who helps good people beat bad people who lie and steal." Emma sat beside him, examining his drawings. Suited figures, suitcases full of money, and small silhouettes observing from the shadows. "That's called an auditor, or investigator, or maybe a lawyer," she explained, stroking his hair. Michael shook his head, convinced. "No, it's different. Those people only look at papers and numbers. I want to be someone who looks at people, who sees what they're really doing when they think nobody's watching." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. In his innocence, Michael had perfectly captured the essence of what they were building at Richardson Corp, a new form of corporate surveillance, based not on technology or bureaucracy, but on humanity and observation. "You know, Michael," she said thoughtfully, "I think you just invented a profession that really doesn't exist yet, and it's a brilliant idea." The boy's eyes shone with pride. "Do you really think so?" "I'm sure. And did you know we're doing something similar with Mr. Richard now?" Michael's face became serious. "Is he bad like those others? The pretty lady and the man with glasses?" Emma hesitated, pondering how to explain ethical nuances to a child. "He did wrong things, yes. He took money that wasn't his, lied to people who trusted him. Then he needs to be caught, like in movies." "Yes, but it's not always as simple as in movies," Emma sighed. "Sometimes catching the villains the wrong way can hurt many innocent people too." Michael frowned, processing the information. "Like, if to catch the big bad wolf, we had to tear down the Three Little Pigs' house?" Emma smiled at the perfect analogy. "Exactly like that. That's why we're being very careful." The following night, the plan entered its decisive phase. At the elegant restaurant of the Marina Hotel, Richard Mendez waited nervously, checking his watch every few minutes. When Charles finally appeared, relief and tension mixed visibly on his face. "Did you bring what you promised?" Richard asked, without preambles. Charles nodded, sitting down. "Depends. Did you bring what we agreed?" Richard discreetly slid an envelope under the table. 50,000, in small, untraceable bills as you requested. Charles checked the contents with a quick movement. "Looks correct. Now, about the audit documents. What Richard didn't know was that at the next table, discreetly positioned, were Anthony and Emma, using simple but effective disguises. He with a fake beard and different glasses. She with a blonde wig and makeup that significantly altered her features. And more importantly, 3 tables ahead, a federal prosecutor and 2 financial police agents followed everything, recording every word, every movement, every implicit confession. When Richard finally left the restaurant, satisfied he had resolved another problem with money, he didn't notice the figures moving silently to intercept him in the parking lot. He didn't notice that his world was about to crumble, not in a public spectacle, but in a silent and calculated collapse. The next morning, Richardson Corp operated normally. No dramatic announcements, no ostentatious police presence. The only unusual thing was Richard Mendez's absence, explained by his secretary as an emergency medical leave. In Anthony's office, however, the atmosphere was one of contained victory. He accepted the deal, Anthony informed, reading the email he had just received from the prosecutor. Full restitution of diverted amounts, complete cooperation in investigations of other market schemes, and discreet resignation from his position. In exchange, he avoids preventive prison and public trial. Emma nodded, satisfied. "And the company stays protected. We'll present it to shareholders as planned reorganization, early retirement. Meanwhile, we implement the new transparency protocols without his resistance." Emma looked out the window, at the city that stretched infinitely. "You know what's saddest? Richard probably isn't the last. In an organization this size, with so many resources, there will always be someone trying to exploit the system." Anthony joined her by the window, his reflection overlapping the skyscraper horizon. "You're right, but now we're prepared. We have eyes and ears where we didn't have them before. The invisible network," Emma murmured, smiling at the term Michael had invented. "Exactly." Anthony turned to face her. "And that brings me to an idea I've been considering. Something more permanent, more structured." Emma raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening. A formal department within the company. Not just for corporate ethics, but for what we could call proactive integrity." Anthony gestured emphatically, animated by the idea. "A team trained to identify ethical risks before they become real problems. People chosen not for diplomas or connections, but for their ability to observe, to understand human behavior. Like the truth guardians Michael imagined," Emma commented, a gentle smile on her lips. "Exactly. And I want you to lead it." Emma blinked, surprised. "Me? Anthony? I'm already overwhelmed with my current role, and I'm still learning about the corporate world. I don't have experience to lead an entire department." "Experience?" Anthony laughed softly. "Emma, in 6 months you identified a conspiracy that my most experienced executives didn't see in years. You set up an operation to expose Richard that worked perfectly, and you did it all using skills that no business school teaches." Emma felt the weight of the proposal, the responsibility Anthony was offering her. It wasn't just a position, it was a chance to institutionalize a deep cultural change. "I would need to assemble a diversified team," she said slowly, already considering the possibilities. "People from different hierarchical levels, different departments, and especially people who normally don't have a voice in decisions. Like you didn't have until a few months ago," Anthony completed. Emma nodded, growing determination illuminating her gaze. "I accept, but with one condition." "What?" "That this department's first project be reviewing the working conditions and salaries of all the company's invisible employees. Janitors, coffee servers, drivers, receptionists. The people who formed our information network not for money, but for loyalty and sense of justice." Anthony extended his hand. "Deal. The Proactive Integrity Department officially starts today." As they sealed the agreement with a handshake, Emma couldn't help but think about how her life had changed drastically. From the mansion's kitchen to an office on the 30th floor. From serving coffee to making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. An unlikely journey, initiated by the innocent gesture of a boy answering a phone call. 2 years had passed since the cold morning when Michael answered that fateful call. The Richardson mansion, once a symbol of inaccessible power, now served as a training center and retreats for company employees. Anthony himself had moved to a smaller apartment, closer to the office, claiming he needed to reduce the distance between himself and the real world. Emma and Michael now occupied a comfortable house in a tree-lined neighborhood, not ostentatiously luxurious, but safe and welcoming. Emma's mother, previously confined to a humid room in a distant suburb, enjoyed a sunny space with a garden, where she cultivated herbs and flowers, therapy for her body tired by years of hard work. At Richardson Corp, the transformation was even deeper. The Proactive Integrity Department, initially received with skepticism by traditional executives, had become a model studied by other corporations. A diverse team of 30 people, led by Emma, functioned like a corporate immune system, identifying unethical behaviors before they became crises. On a spring morning, Emma received a special visit in her office. A team of journalists from the country's main business magazine, interested in a profile about the silent revolution at Richardson Corp. "So, Ms. Santos," began the reporter, a middle-aged woman with perceptive eyes, "many in the corporate world are calling your department disruptive innovation in governance. Others say it's just a marketing move after the scandals. How would you describe the work you do here?" Emma smiled, accustomed to this type of skepticism. "We call our work humanizing corporate surveillance. Instead of depending only on algorithms, audits, and reports, we observe people, behaviors, relationship patterns." "And does this work better than traditional methods?" "It works differently," Emma explained. "Algorithms detect anomalies in data. Auditors find discrepancies in documents. But people detect subtle behavioral changes, corridor conversations, unlikely alliances, non-verbalized emotions." The reporter made quick notes. "Your background is unusual for an executive. How does this influence your approach?" Emma reflected for a moment. "I spent 12 years being invisible, serving coffee in meetings where people planned mergers. layoffs, restructurings. Nobody noticed my presence, so they spoke freely. I learned that a person's true character rarely reveals itself in formal presentations or annual reports. It reveals itself when they think nobody important is looking. And this invisibility is something you deliberately cultivate in this department. Not invisibility, but the humility to recognize that valuable insights can come from any hierarchical level. Our team includes everyone from former executives to people who started as office boys and receptionists. The reporter seemed genuinely intrigued. And the concrete results? Besides the Richard Mendez case, which is already known, Emma opened a folder on her computer. In the last 2 years, we identified and stopped 17 attempts at internal fraud, avoiding estimated losses of $140 million. More importantly, we implemented structural changes that made the company more resistant to unethical behavior. Like the 40% salary increase for the cleaning team and the daycare in the building? Exactly. People who are treated with dignity and feel they have a future in the company not only work better, they become natural guardians of its integrity. The reporter paused, studying Emma with renewed interest. Your son Michael is how old now? 12. And is it true he created the department's original name, Truth Guardians? Emma laughed. Yes, although we opted for something more corporate. Officially, Michael has a very cinematic vision of our mission. Does he still want to follow in your footsteps? Emma's smile softened, becoming more reflective. Michael is at an age of constant changes. Last week, he wanted to be an astronaut. Yesterday, he talked about being a chef. But what remains constant is his sharp sense of justice and his attention to detail. Whatever path he chooses, I think he'll always be an attentive observer of the world. After the interview, Emma had a meeting scheduled with Anthony at the company cafe, not in the formal meeting room, but in the open space where employees of all levels mingled. It was a new policy they had implemented. Important discussions happened in common spaces, not behind closed doors. Anthony was already waiting for her, a simple cup of coffee in front of him. At 60, he seemed more relaxed than ever. His beard, once meticulously trimmed, now showed some gray strands he didn't bother hiding. His suit remained impeccable, but the tie had become a rarity. How was the interview? He asked when Emma joined. The table. Good. Less hostile than I expected. I think they're genuinely interested in the model. Anthony nodded, satisfied. It's good to see our work recognized. But it wasn't to talk about the magazine that I called this meeting. Emma immediately noticed the change in his tone. What happened? I received a proposal from the International Federation of Companies. They want me to lead a global task force on new corporate governance models. That's incredible, Anthony. A validation of everything we've built here. Yes, but he hesitated, rotating the cup between his fingers. It would require me to spend half my time traveling. Lectures, consultancies, international forums. Emma understood immediately. And the company? Exactly. I would need someone to assume effective presidency during my absence. Someone I trust completely. Emma's heart raced when she realized where the conversation was going. Anthony, if you're thinking of me, I need to remind you there are dozens of more qualified executives with decades of experience and experience in repeating the same mistakes. He gently interrupted. Emma, you transformed our corporate culture in 2 years. You implemented systems that our competitors are desperately trying to copy. And more importantly, you see the people behind the numbers, the human beings behind the positions. Emma felt a mix of fear and excitement. The board would never approve. A former cook without a college degree as interim president? Anthony smiled. The board already approved unanimously. I presented the data, your department's results. Numbers. Don't lie, Emma. Under your leadership, productivity increased, fraud decreased, and our market reputation has never been better. I don't know what to say. Say you accept that you'll continue building a company where human value matters as much as market value. Emma looked around the corporate cafe. Employees from different departments conversed, worked, laughed, together. The environment was vibrant, collaborative, so different from the tense and hierarchical atmosphere of years past. When would you need my answer? I have 2 weeks before I need to respond to the Federation. Emma nodded slowly. I need to think. Talk with Michael and my mother. It's a decision that affects all of us. Of course. Take the time you need. Anthony stood up, preparing to leave. But know that, regardless of your decision, what we built here has already changed this company's direction forever. And it all started with a curious boy and an unexpected phone call. That night, While driving home, Emma reflected on the unlikely journey life had traced for her, from the kitchen to the president's office, from invisible to corporate example, from survivor to leader. Upon arriving home, she found Michael on the porch, absorbed in his new telescope, a gift from Anthony on his last birthday. "Looking at the stars?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Trying. There's too much city light." He adjusted the focus, concentrated. "How was your day?" Emma smiled, thinking about how to summarize everything that had happened. "Let's say, I was offered a great opportunity and a great responsibility." Michael looked away from the telescope, studying his mother's face with that sharp perception that had always characterized him. "You're scared." It wasn't a question, but an accurate observation. Emma nodded. "A little. It's a very big step. Bigger than leaving the kitchen for an office." Emma laughed. "Touché. But yes, in certain aspects. I would lead the entire company while Anthony travels the world." Michael absorbed the information, his young face unexpectedly serious. "You know what I think?" "What?" "That people who are afraid of power are usually the best ones to have it." He shrugged, as if he had said something obvious. "At least that's what happens in the books and movies I like." Emma hugged her son, amazed at the wisdom that sometimes emerged from his innocence. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably when I answered that phone," he replied with a mischievous smile. "Or maybe it's just because I have the best mother in the world, as an example." As the sky darkened completely and the first stars became visible despite the city's light pollution, Emma felt a growing certainty within herself. She would accept the challenge, not out of personal ambition, but for the opportunity to continue the transformation they had initiated. A business empire that had begun with distorted values, based only on profit and power, was slowly being rebuilt on foundations of integrity, respect, and humanity. And somehow, the catalyst for this change had been a curious boy who, on a cold morning, answered a phone call he shouldn't have. Destiny, Emma reflected, sometimes chooses the most unlikely messengers for its most important lessons. The ceremony was discreet, held in the company's main auditorium on a common Wednesday morning. There was no pomp, no press coverage, just employees gathered to witness a historic transition. Anthony Richardson, in an impeccable navy blue suit, seemed simultaneously nostalgic and enthusiastic as he approached the microphone. 3 years ago, he began, his voice resonating through the silent auditorium, this company almost collapsed, not due to market failures or external competition, but something more insidious, the erosion of fundamental values like integrity and mutual respect. He paused, scanning the attentive faces in the audience. Veteran executives, administrative staff, maintenance team, all gathered in the same space. What saved us wasn't a brilliant strategy or capital injection. It was something much simpler and more powerful. People who had the courage to do what was right, even when it wasn't easy. His eyes found Emma, sitting in the front row, with Michael, beside her wearing a bow tie he had insisted on putting on for the special occasion. Today, as I assume my new role as Global Ambassador for Richardson Corp., I have the immense pride of officially announcing Emma Santos as Chief Executive during my international mission. A unanimous decision by the board, based not on diplomas or connections, but on proven results and a human vision of leadership that transformed our corporate culture. A murmur of approval ran through the auditorium, followed by applause that grew in intensity. Emma noticed with emotion that the most enthusiastic applause came from the area where General Services employees sat, many of whom had been her colleagues not long ago. Upon taking the stage to symbolically receive command of the company, Emma felt a whirlwind of emotions. The path from the mansion's kitchen to this moment seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Every difficulty, every battle, every small victory had been a step in this journey she could never have imagined. "Thanks. You," she said into the microphone, her voice firm despite the emotion. "I accept this responsibility with humility and determination. Determination to continue building a company where financial success and human well-being walk side by side, where transparency isn't just a buzzword, but a daily practice." Her eyes found Michael in the audience, his young face glowing with pride. Beside him, her elderly mother, who had never imagined seeing her daughter in such a position, discreetly wiped away a tear. 3 years ago, an accidental phone call changed this company's direction. Today, I want us to know that there are no accidents when people of goodwill are attentive and ready to act with courage. Richardson Corp's future will be built not just in meeting rooms and financial spreadsheets, but in corridors, cafes, and shared spaces where real people meet, talk, and collaborate. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. Emma noticed that many of the oldest executives, initially skeptical about her rise, now showed sincere respect, not for her unlikely story of overcoming, but for the concrete results her approach had brought. After the ceremony, while employees returned to their posts, Emma found herself briefly alone with Anthony in her, now hers, office. "Are you ready?" he asked, adjusting the document folder he would take on his first international trip as corporate ambassador. Emma looked through the wide window at the city that stretched to the horizon, the same city where she had arrived 20 years earlier, a desperate single mother for any job that could feed her son. "I am," she replied with a conviction that surprised them both. "Not because I feel completely prepared, but because I understand what's at stake. It's not just a company, it's lives, futures, dignity." Anthony nodded, satisfied. "Do you know what my biggest mistake as CEO was during all these years?" "What?" "Believing that business was just about numbers, strategies, and power. It took me almost 6 decades to realize they're fundamentally about people." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't make the same mistake." "I won't," Emma promised. "Numbers will always have their place, but people will come first." When Anthony left, Emma remained for a moment alone in the spacious office. Her eyes scanned the luxurious details, the designer furniture, the artwork on the walls, the latest technology system. Everything impressive, everything designed to inspire respect and even intimidation. Her first act as president was to call the facilities. "Team, I need some changes here," she explained to the surprise manager. "The desk needs to be repositioned so it doesn't create a barrier between me and whoever enters. Those intimidating armchairs, replaced with something more comfortable and welcoming." And she hesitated, then smiled. "And I want a direct door, connecting this office to the common cafe area." The manager blinked, confused. "A door to the employee cafe?" "Exactly. Leadership shouldn't be isolated in an ivory tower. It should be accessible, present, connected to the company's daily reality." While dictating the changes, Emma reflected on their symbolism. They weren't just aesthetic alterations, but declarations of principles. A new form of leadership was taking shape, inspired not by administration manuals, but by the lived experience of someone who knew both the invisibility of backstage and the power of spotlights. That night, upon arriving home, Emma found a small surprise celebration organized by Michael and her mother, a homemade cake, decorated, with the words, "Congratulations, President," in colorful icing, waited on the living room table. "You're crazy," Emma laughed, moved by the simplicity and sincerity of the gesture. "Grandma made the cake," Michael explained proudly. "I did the decoration. It's crooked, but it was made with love." Emma's mother, now wearing new glasses she could afford thanks to the health plan her daughter had provided, hugged her tightly. "If your father could see you now," the lady whispered in her ear. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. Her father, a worker who died in a workplace accident when she was only 15, could never imagine his daughter would one day lead one of the country's largest companies. "He would be proud of you too." "Mom," Emma replied, "for never giving up, for teaching me the importance of dignity even in the humblest jobs." While cutting the cake and talking animatedly about the future, Emma felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her life had been transformed in ways she could never predict, but the essential values that sustained her remained the same. Honest work, courage to do right, and the conviction that every person, regardless of position, deserved to be seen and respected. In his room, before sleeping, Michael made notes. In a special notebook, a diary he had started keeping since the phone call day, as he called it. He wrote not just about events, but about the lessons he extracted from them, observations about human behavior, power, and ethics. On a new page, he wrote in his still childish handwriting, "Today Mom became company president." Everyone applauded, even the expensive suited men who used to not even look at her. "I think people respect those who do the right thing, even if it takes a while. Someday, when I grow up, I want to create a place where nobody is invisible, where everyone has a voice, like Mom is doing." He closed the notebook and looked out the window at the starry sky. Somewhere out there, the world continued spinning, full of injustices and opportunities, shadows and lights. But here, in this small corner of it, something had changed for the better. And it all started with a simple gesture, answering a phone when nobody else was looking. 5 years had passed since Emma assumed the presidency of Richardson Corp. What had started as a temporary position became permanent. When Anthony, after 2 years traveling the world as corporate ambassador, decided to officially retire, maintaining himself only as honorary board president. Under Emma's leadership, the company not only prospered financially, but became a model of ethical governance celebrated internationally. The Richardson method, as it became known, was studied in business schools and implemented by corporations seeking to balance profit and social responsibility. On an autumn morning, Emma walked through the company corridors, greeting employees by name. Unlike many CEOs who isolated themselves in their executive floors, she made a point of maintaining regular contact with all hierarchical levels, a practice she had institutionalized as connection walks. As she passed the reception, she noticed a familiar face, older, thinner, but unmistakable. "Vivian," Emma said, her voice neutral. Anthony's ex-wife, now with visible wrinkles around her eyes and gray hair she didn't bother dyeing, seemed momentarily disconcerted. "Emma, or should I say, President Santos. Emma is fine. What brings you here?" Vivian took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable. "I came to deliver this personally." She extended an envelope. "It's an invitation to my foundation's inauguration. After serving my sentence, I decided to do something useful with what's left of my life." Emma accepted the envelope, surprised. After the scandal, Vivian had served 2 years of house arrest and 3 more of community service. The divorce process had been quick and discreet, with Anthony opting for generosity instead of revenge, a decision Emma had supported at the time. "What kind of foundation?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. "Reintegration of women after incarceration." An ironic smile passed over Vivian's lips. "Let's say I found my calling the hardest way possible." Emma studied the woman before her. Where once there had been arrogance and coldness, she now saw vulnerability and, surprisingly, purpose. "I'll be there," she promised. "And I'm sure we can find ways for Richardson to support your initiative." Vivian blinked, visibly moved by this unexpected opening. "Thank you. That would mean a lot." After Vivian left, Emma continued her walk, until reaching the Proactive Integrity Department. Her former domain, now expanded to a team of 50 people, and led by Charles, the former private investigator, who had become a respected executive. "How are we today?" she asked, entering the main room where analysts worked at modern stations, surrounded by data screens and relationship charts. "Everything in order," Charles replied with a smile. "The new behavioral analysis system is working perfectly. We managed to identify and intervene in 3 potential ethical problems before they escalated." Emma toured the room, observing the team's work with satisfaction. What had started as an informal, invisible network had evolved into a sophisticated approach that combined technology and human sensitivity. Algorithms identified suspicious patterns, but it was people trained in behavioral observation who performed final analyses and interventions. "And the internship program for youth from vulnerable communities? Amazing," Charles responded enthusiastically. "Those kids have an observation capacity that executives with MBAs can't match. They perceive behavioral nuances, non-verbalized tensions, implicit alliances, because they spent their lives having to read the environment to survive," Emma commented thoughtfully. "Just like Michael and I used to do." On her way back to the office, Emma checked her watch. She had a video conference with Michael in 15 minutes, now a 17-year-old young man in his final year of high school at one of the country's best schools. Upon entering her room, redesigned years ago to be more accessible and welcoming, she found Anthony waiting for her. At 65, retired and dedicating himself mainly to social projects, he still maintained enviable energy. "Anthony, what a nice surprise. I thought you were fishing at that remote cabin of yours." He laughed, standing to greet her. "Nature is wonderful, but I miss civilization occasionally. Besides, I needed to deliver this personally." He extended an elegant folder that Emma immediately recognized as the traditional company stock packaging. "What is this?" "My gift for Michael. When he turns 18 next month, he'll officially become a Richardson Corp shareholder with voting rights." Emma blinked, surprised. "Anthony, that's extraordinary, but he's still so young. Younger than many heirs who assume corporate responsibilities without having done anything to deserve them." Anthony smiled. "Besides, it's not just a gift for him, but for the company. Michael has a unique perspective. He grew up observing a corporate transformation from within, understands both the value of operational work and the complexities of executive leadership. Emma nodded slowly, understanding the long-term vision that motivated Anthony. He'll be extremely honored, and probably full of innovative ideas to implement immediately. I'm counting on it, Anthony laughed. Innovation is what keeps century-old companies alive, and Richardson Corp is just beginning its second phase of life. When Anthony left, Emma prepared for the video conference with Michael, who was on a school trip to the capital. Her computer screen lit up with her son's face, now a tall, thin teenager, with perceptive eyes that had maintained childish curiosity but gained reflective depth. "Mom," he exclaimed, his face animated. "I have incredible news. I was accepted into Central University's summer program, that immersion in applied social sciences and technology." Emma smiled, proud. The program was extremely competitive, accepting only 50 students from across the country for a month of intensive projects, guided by renowned professors. "That's wonderful, Michael. Congratulations. It must have been your essay on corporate ethics and technology that impressed them." Michael nodded, enthusiastic. "Yes, I think they liked my perspective on how companies can use technology for ethical monitoring without invading privacy. Basically, I described what you built at Richardson, but proposed some innovations." "What kind of innovations?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. "A system that analyzes not just what people do, but how organizational structures incentivize certain behaviors. You know, instead of just identifying bad apples, identifying the contaminated soils that produce those apples." His eyes shone with theoretical enthusiasm. "The ethics professor who reviewed my essay said I have a unique and valuable perspective." Emma felt her heart fill with pride. Michael had grown up in an extraordinary environment, witnessing firsthand both power abuses and the possibility of institutional transformation. And more importantly, he had developed his own vision on how to improve the systems he observed. "Sure, it will be an incredible experience for you," she said. "And speaking of incredible experiences, Anthony was here today. He brought an early gift for your 18th birthday." Michael raised his eyebrows, curious. "What gift?" "Company stock, with voting rights on the board." Michael's face transformed into a mixture of surprise, honor, and, Emma noticed with satisfaction, immediate understanding of the responsibility that represented. "Wow," he finally murmured. "That's huge." "Yes, it is, and completely deserved." Emma smiled. "After all, if it weren't for you and that phone call 8 years ago, there might not be a Richardson Corp today." Michael shook his head, thoughtful. "I still think about that sometimes, you know, how something so small, answering a phone, could change so many lives. Ours, Anthony's, the employees. Small actions often have the biggest impacts," Emma reflected, "especially when done at the right time, by the right person." After the video conference, Emma had one last important task before ending the day, an interview for the new position of Social Responsibility Program Director, created to expand the company's initiatives in the communities where it operated. To her surprise, the final candidate was a familiar face. Edward, Anthony's former personal secretary who had participated in the conspiracy years ago. He entered the room with hesitant steps, visibly nervous. Thinner, gray hair, eyes that carried the weight of wrong choices and their consequences. "Ms. Santos." "Emma," he began, unsure how to address her. "I appreciate the opportunity for this interview. I know it must have been difficult to consider my candidacy." Emma indicated the chair in front of her. "Please sit down, Edward. And yes, I confess I was surprised to see your resume among the finalists, but the selection committee was impressed with your work in the social sector in recent years." Edward nodded, a slight blush tinging his cheeks. "After serving my sentence, I decided I needed to redeem myself somehow. I started working as a volunteer at an NGO that supports ex-inmates. Eventually, I took over project coordination, and for the last 3 years, I've been directing the professional reintegration program." Emma studied the man before her. Where she once saw arrogance and unbridled ambition, she now perceived humility and genuine purpose. "Why Richardson Corp, Edward? There must be companies where your past wouldn't be a complicating factor." Edward took a deep breath, carefully choosing his words. "Precisely because of my past, I know this company inside out, both its vulnerable points and its extraordinary potential. I saw what greed and lack of ethics can destroy, and I also witnessed Even from afar, the transformation you and Anthony implemented. He paused, gathering courage. Besides, I feel I have a debt. Not just legal, which I've already paid, but moral. I actively participated in something that could have destroyed thousands of jobs and lives. I would like the chance to actively participate in building something better. Emma remained silent for a few moments, processing his words. Finally, she asked, "What would you say to employees who remember you and the scandal? How would you earn their trust?" "I wouldn't try to gain trust immediately," Edward replied with surprising frankness. "I know trust is something built with time and consistency. I would start by openly acknowledging my past mistakes, without excuses or justifications. Then I would work daily to demonstrate through concrete actions that I've learned and changed." A slight smile touched Emma's lips. "That sounds very much like the approach we've implemented throughout the company. I learned from you, even from a distance," Edward admitted. "I read every interview, every article about Richardson's transformation, and something you said a few years ago stuck with me. True change happens when we allow people to demonstrate who they really are, not just what they did in the past." Emma remembered that interview. She had been questioned about the company's policy of hiring people with criminal backgrounds for trust positions after proven rehabilitation. "I still believe that," she said simply, "and that's why you're here today." The interview continued for another hour, with technical questions about social project management, resource acquisition, and impact metrics. To Emma's satisfaction, Edward demonstrated genuine competence, deep knowledge, and, more importantly, a vision aligned with the company's new values. At the end, she extended her hand. "Welcome back to Richardson Corp, Edward. This time, I hope we build something together, instead of destroying." The man's eyes shone with contained emotion. "I won't waste this opportunity, Emma. I promise." When he left, Emma remained in her office, reflecting on the complete circles that life sometimes traced. Vivian rebuilding her life through a foundation for incarcerated women. Edward returning to the company he almost destroyed, now to help expand its positive impact. And herself, from kitchen to presidency, a path nobody could have predicted. Her office phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her assistant, President Santos, just reminding you that in 20 minutes we have the video conference with the international team. And then your mother called, asking to confirm if you'll come for Sunday dinner. Emma smiled. No matter how many corporate responsibilities she accumulated, Sundays were still sacred. Family lunches, with her mother preparing traditional dishes and Michael sharing his latest discoveries and theories. "Confirm to my mother that I'll be there punctually, and tell her I'll bring that sweet she loves." As she ended the call, Emma looked at the picture on the opposite wall, a framed photograph of the old gray uniform she had worn for 12 years in the Richardson Mansion kitchen. When she assumed the presidency, many suggested she remove that embarrassing reminder of her past. She not only refused, but made a point of positioning it where all visitors could see. It was more than a decorative piece. It was a constant reminder, for her and for everyone who entered that room, that value and dignity weren't tied to titles or hierarchical positions, that the most important people in an organization were often those nobody noticed, and that profound transformations could begin in the most unlikely places, through the simplest actions. Taking her purse to leave, Emma stopped for a moment in front of the picture. 8 years had passed since that cold morning in the mansion kitchen. 8 years since a curious boy answered a phone call and unleashed a silent revolution that continued to expand in ever-widening circles. "Thank you," she murmured to the framed uniform, a gratitude not just to her past, but to all the invisible people who, at that exact moment, sustained entire empires with their rarely recognized work. As she left the office, she greeted by name the cleaning team starting their night shift. They were the new eyes and ears of the company after business hours, integral part of the invisible network that now extended through all hierarchical levels. "How is your daughter, Mrs. Martinez? Did she recover from asthma?" she asked the lady operating the floor buffer in the corridor. The woman's face lit up with a surprised and grateful smile. "Yes, Mrs. President. That specialist doctor you recommended made all the difference, and the scholarship she won for the technical course is changing her life." Emma nodded, satisfied. This was the true legacy she was building, not just record profits or corporate governance awards, but transformed lives, restored dignity, unlocked futures. "Excellent, Mrs. Martinez. And if you need anything, you know where to find me." Indeed, The parking garage, while getting into her car, a mid-size hybrid model, not the limousine expected for someone in her position, Emma called Michael. "Hi, Mom," he answered promptly. "Already heading home?" "Yes, son. And I was thinking, how about we eat out tonight to celebrate your acceptance into the summer program? That would be great. Can we go to that simple restaurant near home? The Psy, one where you worked as a waitress before going to the Richardson mansion?" Emma smiled, moved by the suggestion. Michael never forgot his roots, never felt ashamed of the path they had traveled. "Perfect. And afterwards, I have something important to discuss with you, about your future and some ideas I have for expanding even more the work we started." At Richardson, while driving through the city streets, Emma observed the buildings passing by, thinking about the invisible stories each one contained. How many mansions hid conspiracies? How many cooks held wisdom that could transform empires? How many accidental phone calls could change the destiny of thousands? The world was made of small gestures and great consequences, of invisible people with immeasurable impacts. And the greatest lesson Emma had learned in her unlikely journey was that true power didn't reside in positions or titles, but in the courage to do what's right, even when nobody was watching, or perhaps especially when someone was. "And it was only because a child answered the phone that all this still exists," she whispered to herself, repeating the phrase that had become a mantra at Richardson Corp Dow, a constant reminder that sometimes the most unlikely messengers bring the most important messages, and that heroes rarely wear capes. Sometimes they just wear gray uniforms and attentive eyes that see what others ignore. Michael Richardson Santos remained silent for a few moments after concluding his inauguration speech. At 25, he was officially becoming the youngest executive director of the newly created Global Institute of Ethical Governance, a joint initiative of Richardson Corp and 12 other international companies committed to transforming global corporate practices. The audience, composed of business leaders, academics, activists, and opinion makers, applauded enthusiastically. In the front row, Emma, now 52 and still president of Richardson Corp, watched her son with undisguised pride. Beside her, Anthony Richardson, at 73, nodded approvingly. "He has your determination and vision," the old businessman commented, leaning toward Emma. "But he also possesses something unique. He grew up witnessing a complete transformation, seeing both the before and after." Emma smiled, agreeing, and he never forgot how it all began. Indeed, Michael had concluded his speech with the story that had become almost legendary in business circles. The accidental phone call a 9-year-old boy had answered, unleashing a series of events that not only saved a company, but inspired a global movement for more human and ethical corporate practices. Stories like this remind us that transformation rarely begins with grand manifestos or dramatic restructurings, Michael had said in his final words. Often, it begins with a small act of courage, with someone who simply does what's right, even when it would be easier to remain silent. After the ceremony, while guests headed to the cocktail reception, Michael found his mother and Anthony in a private moment. "So, what did you think?" he asked, a rare vulnerability showing through his usual confidence. Emma hugged him tightly. "Perfect, honest, inspiring, and more importantly, practical. I especially like the part about implementing protection systems for whistleblowers. The globalized invisible network," Anthony commented with a smile. "Your mother would be proud." Emma felt a tightness in her chest, thinking of her own mother, who had passed away 2 years earlier. The lady had lived long enough to see her daughter transform from cook to president, and her grandson graduate with honors from one of the country's best universities. She had departed peacefully, surrounded by family, in a sunny room very different from the humid apartment where she had raised Emma alone. "She is," Emma replied softly, "wherever she may be." Michael looked around the hall, at the faces of powerful people who now treated him as an equal, CEOs, ministers, influencers. Then, his gaze settled on the service team that circulated discreetly with trays of canapes and champagne glasses. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, moving away. Emma and Anthony watched, intrigued, as Michael approached a young waitress serving drinks in the most distant corner of the hall. He spoke with her briefly, making her smile. Then, to the surprise of nearby guests, he invited her to accompany him to the center of the hall. With a gesture, he asked for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the celebrations, I would like to introduce someone special. This is Louise, one of those responsible for tonight's impeccable service. She is also an administration student in her 3rd year, while working 2 jobs to support herself and help her family. The young woman, visibly disconcerted by the sudden attention, blushed intensely. Michael continued, "Louise just told me a brilliant idea for improving feedback systems between operational employees and strategic management, something we were precisely discussing in our last planning meeting." He turned to the waitress. "Louise, I would like to invite you to our next development meeting. I believe your perspective would be extremely valuable for the Institute." The young woman's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a perceptive observer who understands organizational dynamics from an angle that many executives with years of training have never experienced." Michael completed with a warm smile. Exactly the type of voice we need. While the guests applauded, some genuinely impressed, others clearly uncomfortable with the hierarchy break, Emma felt tears in her eyes. In that simple gesture, Michael had perfectly honored the legacy she and so many others had built over the years. The recognition that value and insight can come from any level, that the least heard voices often have the most valuable perspectives. Later, when the 3, Emma, Anthony, and Michael, shared a quiet moment in the office adjacent to the hall, Anthony raised his glass in a toast. "To the future," he said simply. Michael smiled, adding, "And to the past that brought us here." Emma completed, her voice heavy with emotion, "And to all the invisible ones who sustain the world, even when nobody is looking." As they toasted, Emma couldn't help but reflect on the perfect circularity of life. 15 years ago, she was an invisible cook in an imposing mansion, teaching her small son to navigate an unjust world with dignity and integrity. Today, that same son launched a global initiative to transform the very power structures that had once kept them on the margins, and all because on a cold morning, a curious boy answered a phone call he shouldn't have. If stories like this touched you, Michael concluded in his final speech of the night, share them. The world is full of voices waiting to be heard, of invisible people with the power to transform entire systems. Sometimes, all we need to do is answer when the phone rings and have the courage to speak the truth, even when nobody expects to hear it from us. Outside, the city gleamed under the night sky. Millions of lights, millions of stories, millions of possibilities awaiting discovery. And in each building, in each company, in each institution, invisible people continued their silent vigilance, waiting for the right moment to make the difference only they could make. The cycle continued, stronger than ever. If this story moved you, share it with someone special. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to follow other stories of love, reunions, and overcoming that will warm your soul.